Hi, everyone coming in. We're just gonna wait
Awesome.
yet until
We got even Brian's here today. Hey, Brian. Pretend I could hear you say hello back. Luca.
See Paul is there too.
Yeah, it's great. Oh, wonderful.
Oh, we got Statterford.
Yeah. Not like he's not busy enough. He took the time out of his day to join us here.
well, hi, Kristen.
All right, numbers are slowing down. We will get to it. I always find these hours go so quickly. So the quicker we get into it, the more we get to talk. Today we will acknowledge that we are gathering virtually on land that was the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. Hi, everyone. I am Gino Di Domenico, and it is my pleasure to be here on behalf of Tacofino and Shift Change to welcome you all here today. As you may know, this is our fourth and our last years of change. Change is committed to continuously and actively support positive and sustainable change for our industry by creating an avenue for dialogue on opportunities that exist in an effort to inspire people and hopefully have them take action. We are currently in the process of locking down our next 4 sessions, which is very exciting for us. As many know, the first shift change started in our Tacofino location at Ocho. It was a really big event. We gathered, not very not distantly. We had drinks, we had a nice time, and we talked with some great people. I had some great discussion, and we'd love to get back to that point one day when we can get back into some of these restaurants that are doing great things and celebrating them. But until then, we're gonna take it virtually, keep it virtually online, and we're doing that today with our friend Dallah Chami. Dallah is the co-owner of Superbaba. It's a modern Middle Eastern quick service restaurant here in Vancouver, as well as one in Victoria. Dallah also is a founder of the VanFBC, that's the Vancouver Food and Beverage Relief Fund, that him and a couple of his friends and his partners started here when the COVID pandemic first hit. And 2 of those friends are our other participant host, pal, Taylor Shabadiak here, and Puneet, who works at Tacofino with us as well, and his partner, Leah, who has taken over VanFBC for the time being, while Dallah's focusing his efforts on the restaurant business. Most recently, both Taylor and Dallah, congratulations, gentlemen, were nominated for the Western Living's Foodie of the Year. Yay. The camera's over there. I'm looking over there and cheersing. Today's donation on behalf of Tacofino, Dallah has chosen that the $1,250 donation will go to the downtown Eastside Women's Shelter. You can visit their site at dewc.ca if you'd like to provide donations there yourself as well. As usual, we will be taking your questions throughout this dialogue, and there will be some time at the end as well to ask whatever questions that you might have. Donations and requests for money are still open at VanFBC as well. If you'd like to donate money there, and you can learn more about what we're doing at Shift Change with Shift Change at shiftchangenow.com, and learn more about Dallah and the Downtown Women's Eastside Foundation. Without further ado, Taylor, waiting patiently, I'll let you take it away. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Oh, thank you, Gino. Thank you, everyone. Really excited for today to talk to my friend, So Dallah and I have been friends for a while now, and someone that I can confidently say that every time that we talk on the phone, we end up talking for a lot longer than we assumed. But I always walk away kind of learning something new or with a new perspective. So I'm super stoked to be able to connect with you and talk today. Yeah, and as it relates to this, kind of prefacing that shift change is a space where we're all learning, including us. And these discussions serve as an opportunity for us to learn from individuals in the community that are doing awesome things, including Dallah. And so this is not us saying that we're the titans and have it all figured out, but it's kind of us learning, and we're on this journey, and we're inviting the industry as a whole to join us on it too. So Dallah, I'm super stoked. It's nice to see you. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Good, good. Finally a day off, so it's been okay.
Yeah, you've been putting in some long hours. You got the new spot open. If everyone in this room should know that Superbaba is not only incredible, but it's moved into a physical location at the on Main Street there. So it's delicious. It's fantastic.
Thanks.
Superbaba.com. That's great. So I'm gonna ask you some questions here, and everyone in the room, if you do have questions, we invite you to ask in a couple different ways. One is that you can send a question to us directly, and Gino's going to be helping us with going through some of those questions. The other option too is there's a button there to submit Q&A, and then the third option too, if you'd prefer to speak, you can hit the little hand button that's on the bottom. I think it's on the bottom right of your console for the Zoom chat. And you can pop that open. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm going to unmute you and you can ask your question, and then we'll be able to have a dialogue that way. Gino mentioned we're going to have some time at the end. Cool. So just getting into it, Dallah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Gino, and thank you, Taylor. I guess I don't know how much everyone knows about me, but I have a sort of a mixed background when it comes to my experience in my career and in the restaurant industry. Sort of a mix of marketing, finance, and tech startups, eventually rolling into the food industry. And to full disclosure, I work with Tacofino. The same owners of Tacofino are my business partners and my mentors. So I learned a lot through working with Tacofino, working with my other business partners at Medina, and also through all my friends, a lot of them who are here, such as Brian Statterford. A lot of people, I definitely value their opinion when it comes to this industry, and I came into the restaurant world because I love this industry as it pertains to food and serving people, and making people happy through just a meal. And it was a lot more fulfilling than working in the tech industry for me, where it felt like you were always delivering an unfinished product and it was always waiting on a fix or an update. Whereas when you're in the food world, you get to create something, someone gets to experience it, and the whole thing is finished, and there's no trailing feeling of, well, we're going to get to it, it's going to be finished eventually. It's actually there and they get to experience it.
And no beta falafel.
Yeah, no beta falafel, exactly.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so can you tell us a bit about Superbaba and how that came to be?
Yeah, so I'm my background ethnically is Lebanese, but I was also born in Saudi Arabia, and I grew up between the Middle East and the West Coast. And so when it comes to food, I have a very split personality of eating a lot of Middle Eastern food at home. My mom cooked since I was a kid. We'd eat at home all the time, but I also loved fast food so much when I was a kid, and so definitely a combination of both things. And so when I wanted to get into the food world, I wanted to figure out a way to make Middle Eastern food popular in the fast food sense, not as like just the donair shop that you go to, but something that you can eat multiple times a week. And so coming up with a business plan for that, in the process, I met the guys at Tacofino and the people from Medina, and they happened to want to get into Middle Eastern food at the same time. So it was sort of serendipitous that we all met at the same time and decided that we would open a restaurant in that sense, do Middle Eastern food that was done in a new way. And it just so happened to be in Victoria because things were so crazy in Vancouver, the restaurants opening so rapidly, and Victoria seemed like a great test market. So I moved over there and we ended up opening it all together. And that was about 3.5 years ago now.
That's wild. So you came over to Vancouver. I remember the truck. You're right there on Burrard, and then now you've just recently opened up Superbaba on Main Street. And
Yeah.
during the pandemic too. So
Yeah, it was really weird. It was good and bad. You know, we got to get rid of the truck.
yeah,
Food trucks are a lot of work, as you guys know at Tacofino, and so getting rid of the truck and moving to a restaurant was great for me because it was nice to have a solid home that we can, you know, serve from all day long. We don't have to wear a commissary and all that kind of stuff. So opening during the pandemic was crazy, but we're built for takeout, so we're lucky in that sense. And we have a huge space for people to be able to wait for their food and line up. So people have been pretty great about it, and we're holding steady through this pandemic.
that's awesome. And kind of on that note, like not only were you opening a restaurant during the pandemic, you did help start Van FBC. And you know, for the people here that aren't aware of Van FBC, it kind of has the two components. There is the community component, and there is also the relief fund. So can you tell us what inspired you to kind of take action?
I mean, drawing from my experience in the tech world was that everybody talked there. You know, obviously they're more inclined to use apps and things that have to do with communication. So everybody just was always communicating. Whereas I realized in the food industry, there were small cliques of people, but most people didn't interact with each other or talk about things. And, you know, there was no way to exchange information like, you know, what's the best POS, or what's the best way to schedule people, or what's the best way to pay people. And nobody really spoke very much. And when the pandemic hit, it was very clear that a lot of people weren't talking and everyone started panicking. So I just started a Slack group and started inviting people to it to just get people to start talking, just so that people can start exchanging information. So we all know, you know, what's the deal with CERB, what's the deal with rent relief, what's the deal with all this kind of stuff, or what are people doing to survive, you know, closing or operating during the pandemic. And luckily it drew quite a bit of people, and we started doing chats, and it was still difficult to get people to participate, but there are a lot of people who reached out to me and said that, you know, it was great to actually have other owners that I don't talk to be able to ask them questions or communicate. And I thought sometimes it was just to talk, to unload all that stress that they're having. So after the Slack group started, you know, we saw other people start relief funds, but I didn't want to do I didn't want to do it alone and open a relief fund and try to distribute money because I didn't know how to do all of that. So I think it was Puneet who reached out to me and said, hey, I think she was talking to you about it. And she said, we should start this thing because they're doing it in Montreal and I think we can do it too. And I said, great. So I think it was like one night, 3 hours, and we opened this fund and had everything ready to go and started collecting money to help people, mostly employees who needed help paying bills, not huge ones, but up to 150 bucks. And we started collecting money, and next thing you know, breweries, wineries were all donating money. You know, a lot of them were pretty big amounts of money, and we hit, I think, $100,000. And it's still open, and we're still trying to distribute a lot of the money to people who need it.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so, you know, kind of on that, not only was it something that was needed during the time being that the industry was so heavily impacted, but, you know, I imagine there was a lot of learning from you too, like, you know, seeing kind of the requests coming through, and, you know, also the community, you know, you have owners, operators, employees, managers coming together. Is there anything that you started to see that was a trend, or, you know, some things that started happening as a result of kind of those two initiatives?
Well, we quickly started to realize that a lot of employees were treated as expendable. You know, like, even though there's so much stress on an owner during the pandemic, it's not really a carte blanche to just let your employees, you know, like basically leave them to their own devices. Like, you can't just say, oh, I'm sorry, can't pay you anymore, and then they're gone. You know, even if it's a money thing or an hours thing, you should still have some sort of support network or support resources so that they can also survive during this crazy time. And because, you know, eventually COVID is going to be over, and you're going to want these people to come back. So you can't treat them like they're nothing. And we got a lot of comments in the applications of certain companies who basically were doing that. Like, you know, you're not our problem anymore. Go figure it out. So I think that encouraged us to, and especially Leah, who's taken on a lot of it now, is building those resources for employees and employers to be easily accessible and written more in English and less in government speak, and have everyone know their rights or know where they can find support, or employers, you know, they know how to treat their employees fairly because they might be doing something wrong, but they have no idea that they're doing it and that it's wrong. So through a lot of the negative talk that was coming up in those applications, we realized that there needs to be a better place for resources and maybe better practices moving forward.
And where do you think that, like, as it relates to, you know, some of those opportunities, is there, like, you know, you did mention that people are just kind of like severing the ties with individual. Like, did you see others, you know, things that came through that were really kind of like, you know, really were surprising to you?
Yeah, I mean, there were some places that they did set up their employees, like they paid them extra, or they paid them through a week that they weren't working, or they made sure everyone had all the resources they need to either get on EI or get on CERB. Right. They had a long-term plan set up, and like they told them, like, this is our plan, and we'll take it week by week as the pandemic goes, and they'll keep their employees, you know, like the Superbaba in Victoria is run by two people who are also running the same Taco Fino in Victoria. And so those two guys, you know, they set up a chat group for all the employees, both Superbaba and Taco Fino in Victoria. And that chat group was both for keeping people updated in terms of if anyone needed food, if anyone needed any sort of help, or if people just wanted to connect because everyone was at home stuck. So it wasn't just for like monetary or resources, but it was like for their mental health, to say, you know, if you just want to chat, the group's right here. You guys can talk about nothing, but at least there's somebody to talk to. And those things are all important. So, you know, when I saw that was a really positive and awesome thing that they did over there. And I think that's something that could have been very easy for all restaurants here to do, which is just set up a group where all your employees who are not really your employees anymore, or they're laid off, but at least there's a place where they still feel like there's a support system.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I mean, like, I think now more than ever, like, I feel it for sure, is that sometimes that, you know, that lack of community and that feeling, like, you forget how much of your time spent at work until you're not there.
Totally. And a lot of people just wanted to be at work at one point, I think.
It's true. So I guess kind of you mentioned a couple things as it related to, you know, people coming through and saying, you know, like, oh, you know, my employer didn't pay me out, or things like that. Like, you know, kind of based on your experience, you know, through the industry, you know, kind of coming into it because it's your passion. Is there anything that you observed along the way that you saw as kind of like trends, or, you know, things that were a little bit more systemic that that existed that maybe not had existed in tech?
Yeah, I mean, I think every industry has their problems. Sometimes I feel like sort of my naive approach to the restaurant industry helps me a little bit, because I haven't been indoctrinated into a system where things just are the way they are. You know, in tech, we had a huge problem where there were unpaid internships.
Right.
You know, that parallels in the restaurant industry with stages. You know, we justify them however we want to justify them. But in reality, it turns out, while I was in the tech industry, that unpaid internships were illegal. And I was one of the lucky ones to get back paid for all the time that I worked for free. But there are things in every industry, and I've seen that here. So, you know, unpaid stages is a problem. Unpaid overtime is a huge problem. Wage theft and tip theft is a huge problem. I think alcohol policies inside restaurants are a problem, and general workplace culture can be an issue if the tone is not set from the beginning.
Well, that's great. And you mentioned a couple of things that I think we should dig into, but I guess the first is like, the higher level of it. Like as it relates, yeah, I think you're right. Every industry has its stuff, right? As it relates to some of the systemic things that, are kind of unique to that area. And then with that, there's some positive stuff, but there is some areas where it's like either a gray area or it's not so great. And that's every industry. I want to highlight that. But why do you think some of that, as it relates to overtime and stages, why do you think that became systemic to the hospitality industry as it relates to that?
Well, I mean, a huge part is being competitive, right? So I think the competition between cooks wanting to get to the top or wanting to get to the best place to work creates, it's to parallel it in the office setting, it's the person who comes in before the boss and leaves after the boss. That's the same type of attitude where people do this stuff because they know they need to do it to get ahead. Like how are you going to get an entry level job that needs work experience if you can't get work experience because you can't get hired? So you work for free to get that experience in order to get the entry level job. And in the restaurant industry, you're doing an unpaid stage to get into a restaurant that's extremely difficult to work at, but that's the only way to get in, so you'll do it. So, it's unfortunate in that sense. And then also the overtime one is another one where it's like an unspoken agreement where you work a few more hours and you might, that person might not be able to say anything because they can't risk losing their job. So is it worth going through the legal part of it or the HR part of it, or do they just work those hours and be happy with what they have? There's a lot of stuff that I feel like is an abuse of power or an abuse of policy. And most of the time, people just don't speak up because they don't know they can, or because speaking up will make it worse for them.
That's a great point too, is if it becomes normalized, people kind of, it gets perpetuated. So it's not like specific to one restaurant. So it just becomes, like an
yeah. It's an industry thing.
Yeah, and it's just like it's that like kind of you and I've talked about this quite a bit, and I think we've seen it on the Van FBC side too. It's just like, but in your opinion, as it relates to kind of perpetuating some of those things, what kind of experience, like, I know it's hard to speak for everyone, but high level, like what impact do you think it has on the individual and in turn like the industry as a whole?
Which part?
So as it relates to kind of perpetuating the systemic things, like what do you think that impact has on a person?
I mean, I think people, again, it's like I'm not an expert, nor have I achieved like sort of the utopia of having a workplace. But my point of view, I feel like people perpetuate those systemic problems because they're easier to do than to do the hard thing. Right. And the hard thing is to go against all of those practices that are bad. But ultimately, there's nothing morally superior or selfless about doing the things that are better, because in the end, if you have a better workplace culture or a better staff, it pays you back as an owner in terms of retention and staff attitudes, so quality, consistency, all that kind of stuff. So there's nothing selfless about doing the stuff that's against the systemic issues that we have now, because ultimately, I feel like you benefit from it. I just don't think most people have realized that taking extra care of your workplace, of your staff, will eventually make you more successful.
Right. And I think that's a great point too, is just like if you elevate it, like it does produce a return, because then like, you have an engaged, psychologically safe workplace. And I think that, it does, like, people talk about it, right? And
oh yeah.
And in turn, you're probably going to get the people that, want a better experience for themselves.
Well, I think you find a way to make it so good that you get the best people, because the best people will draw other people that are. We had a talk one time, a long time ago. It was the CMO from Microsoft who, was in Microsoft when Bill Gates was there and worked with him closely. And she has a speech about the B team. And what the B team is that if you have a bad workplace, you end up hiring somebody who is a B player, and that B player doesn't want anyone better than them coming on board. So that person keeps hiring people either like them or worse than them. And you sort of start to have a cancer within your own company where you cannot, it gets to a point where you no longer can get rid of it. And you have all these people who are just average or below average because the people who are at the top created that workplace culture, and it becomes a huge problem. So if you get the best people and have the best environment, you keep attracting those people to come work. And people don't see it very much in the restaurant industry because, again, there's so many stereotypes about the restaurant industry, so many stereotypes about cooks and people who work front of house and servers. And I think it's time to just drop all those stereotypes and stop treating cooks as a monolith, and same with the front of house and everyone as one person. Everybody has a different personality. You know, you'll find cooks who are rough around the edges and have tattoos and all that kind of stuff. Then you'll find cooks who are parents who just love being in the kitchen and they're working full time. And part of our problem is this sort of one brush stroke for the whole industry and the people who work in it.
Yeah, I think that, sorry,
Go ahead, Gino.
Karen mentioned that, there's also a lot of chronic understaffing that's leading to, unpaid overtime, but the work is there, the prep lists are there. Ultimately, the work still needs to get done. And I think that leads to another point, whether it's B-list or being understaffed, to those points, you're going to burn your team out. And, maybe an A player becomes a B player, or, you know what I mean? And now you're covering for sick time. Now people were working longer. It just it just perpetuates like a terrible work environment. Thanks, Karen.
So for example, in our restaurant, because we're a quick service restaurant, it's easy for us to change those things if they're a problem. So for example, if I'm in a quick service restaurant, our menu doesn't change. I can pull up a top 10 list of our sales and say, you know what, there's an item that doesn't work. If it's going to be during COVID and it's a problem and it's a prep problem, then we just get rid of it. But in my opinion, some menus are too big or some menus are too ambitious, especially for a time like COVID. So, use the data to focus your time. If you have an item that's just not selling or selling really poorly, either make it something easier to prep or get rid of it, because your prep list shouldn't lead to unpaid overtime. That means you have a problem with your menu.
It's a great point. While we're on it, Gino, do you have another question you want to share? Or do you?
I do. Maybe I'm going to save a couple for the end here. Thanks.
Cool. So I think that's great. It's just like, you come from a place, where it's kind of looking at that people experience instead of just the product and the customer. So you said something really, like, I really appreciate, and the fact of like that individual approach to really kind of shake those stereotypes. So you as a leader, like what are things that you do personally so you can help change that, not only, that perception in yourself, but for other people that join your team? Like, how do you lead that?
First of all, I have to constantly remind myself that I shouldn't be treating people like they're the same, because that's probably the biggest issue, is that your default setting is to just put somebody in a box and then be like, treat them how they appear to be. So is just working on myself in terms of a leader and someone who has to work with these people. And sometimes getting advice from other people about situations is good because they have a different perspective without knowing the person that you're talking to. But really it comes down to setting the tone of your workplace when you hire people. So to start now, I took a lot of things from the people that I worked with in Victoria, because they had a lot of good points in terms of their staff. So I set the tone very early. So, if somebody works full time for me, they're prioritized to have 5 days on, 2 days off. So they have some sort of foundation for a stable life day to day. They know when they're working, they know when they're not working, and they only work 8-hour shifts. So we do stuff like that. We talk about, zero tolerance for passive aggressive speak inside of the restaurant, or aggressive tones inside the restaurant that are usually allowed in kitchens. We definitely talk about how we work as a team and there's no island. So nobody has a station per se. You are responsible for something, but if you're going down or you need help, somebody else should step in to help you. You cannot work by yourself. And we still have people on our team who are still learning that, because they're used to making sure their stuff is done and it doesn't, everything outside of that is not really their problem. But once they start working together, you start seeing people have a much better time because they don't feel like if they go down, they're all alone. You know, they feel supported in their workplace. So those are things that we talk about. You know, I've implemented something new in this restaurant that we still don't have in Victoria, for example, which is the no alcohol policy in the kitchen. You're not allowed to drink after work when you're done your shift. If you want to drink when we have our seating, you're allowed to leave the kitchen as an employee, become a customer, and you can drink in the restaurant as any other customer. But as in the kitchen, we've realized that alcohol is a huge problem in this industry. We still ignore it. And I just think that I've seen other places do it in California, in New York, all big food cities. We're starting to implement this no alcohol policy in their kitchen because even though I don't care whether somebody or not drinks, I just don't want to encourage it. I don't want to add on to people's stress by facilitating cheap drinks or free drinks at work. So again, I think all of it, you have to treat everyone individually, but you have to set a tone that's general across the board, or set rules or policies across the board. And then from there, make sure that when you're talking to each person that you take them into account.
No, I think that's amazing. Like, I think that it's kind of differentiating from that, instead of like, this is my collective staff, you know, they you know, like this transactional relationship to actual a team-oriented relationship. So
Right.
I think that's really important thing to highlight, is like, how do you establish that? Because from what I took away from what you're saying is essentially like, you know, not only creating that sense of an overall team versus the division of front of house, back of house, or stations or what have you, kind of like setting that precedent that's like one ship or one team, one dream.
Yeah, and during COVID, I mean, like everyone knows, mental health is such an issue right now. So if you think about it, some places, the only places they're interacting with people is at work, and then they're going home and they're by themselves. So why don't we take into account that when they come into work, this is going to be their only human interaction or significant human interaction? Why not it be something positive, so that when they go home, they don't feel like they're stressed from the whole day, that they had to talk to somebody they hate or somebody they fight with all the time, because that seems to be a lot of times what happens is, like, you go to work, you're sort of avoiding somebody that's difficult to work with, and then you still feel it the rest of the day. So I also want to take that into consideration, is that when they come in, I want to make sure everyone comes in and they feel okay, and they leave and they feel okay. So if you have to have difficult talks, you have to have difficult talks, because you cannot ignore the fact that they're probably not interacting with very many people outside of work. So they don't have any other stress, places to unload their stress or talk about work.
Yeah, I think that's one of like obviously take this to everyone that's here taking great salt, but one of the positives of the pandemic is that it really heightened that need for compassion. So, you know, as an individual, that's my takeaway, is like, now people ask each other about each other's mental health because they have a genuine care, because there's like this empathy that exists, you know, just based on that collective experience. And you're right, like now you're required to stay within your, you know, your pod, you know, and things like that. And so yeah, I think that's an incredible way to look at like how much onus is on us, you know, other than a person's immediate family or immediate friends, like to have, you know, there's no other person that's going to have a bigger influence on someone's quality of life as their leaders.
Oh yeah, totally. And you'll I feel like if you provide a good environment, you'll see it in your employees very quickly. Like the difference between some people, it just takes a few weeks after they realize they're in a good space, their attitude shifts, and you'll see it at work. And I think it's a great thing to see, especially when you see your employees become friends. Like, it's a really cool thing to watch happen.
That's really cool. And just really quick, I have a whole bunch of other questions, I know, but you know, you did mention the kind of that set schedule thing. And, you know, in the research I've done and when I've talked to people, you know, there some of the systemic things that come out of the industry is because of the erratic scheduling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You can't really plan for your life. So you've seen like a benefit of like having that set for people?
Yes, the people who are not used to a set schedule find it very odd in the beginning sometimes. But so again, you have mental health problems. Again, you have addiction problems. Sometimes you have general stresses in this industry. You know, people not being able to manage their time, all this kind of stuff. And then you realize it's because the foundation of their work is all over the place.
Right.
So sometimes they work this day, that day, morning shift, closing shift. They don't know when they work. They can't schedule an appointment. There's a million things. And I feel like once you have a set schedule, there's some sort of stability in your life. You can count on your schedule. You know that that's in my life, that's set. And by set schedule, I don't mean like it can't change ever, but at least a month at a time. But the bare minimum to have it a month at a time is set. Ours usually will go 2 months, 2.5 months, unless some new person joins the team and I have to shuffle the schedule and figure that out. But it's just a foundation for the rest of their life and the rest of their time. So they can schedule any doctor's appointments they need, any other appointments. They can figure out when they need to get their groceries or do their laundry or all that kind of stuff, because they no longer have to worry or wait till a schedule comes out to figure it out. Some people don't know that they're working tomorrow till 9 a.m. the day before. And there's no way to have some sort of stable life day to day if you don't know what your schedule is.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just like, having that foundation and that consistency, and then you get some exercise in, when you can walk the seawall, you can go, sure, you can be with your partner or your friend. Like,
to be a little bit of the devil's advocate on this one here, Superbaba is a bit of a smaller, sort of tighter operation. What would you say to these big shining examples? I'm going to say cactus clubs of the world. You have 80, 100, whatever number of employees, and trying to balance everybody's schedule, that sort of thing. Do you think that there's that sort of statement would still stand, planning out a month ahead, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I definitely have to preface, and I should have said this before, my experience is based in service data models, so we can sort of predict the average of what's going on. So for example, I really refrain from cutting people, because if somebody works full-time for you, that means they're counting on that pay. So if you're cutting them, you can. I don't think there's anything illegal about cutting a shift, but if they're an hourly employee, but that person's going to count less and less, or they're not going to feel as supported as they would, because they don't know if they're going to make enough money if we're busy enough. So I definitely, all of my point of views are based on a quick service model that's similar to something like a Chipotle or a McDonald's or a Shake Shack and that. But very recently, I think there's a podcast called the Burnt Chef Journal, who somebody recommended to me recently, and it was Michelin star chef owners who were talking about a very similar thing. So, and the reason they can do it is because they're booked out. So it feels like the restaurant industry, there's a sweet spot for some people where either you're a data-driven, repeatable model, or you're a restaurant that's booked out all the time, so you can count on what you have. Then there's something in the middle that's based on seasonality, how the weather is that day, all that kind of stuff. Coffee shops are like that. Average restaurants are like that. And I don't have an answer for that. I don't know, like, if that's, to be completely honest, because I'm not in that situation. But there must be a way to figure out a model where you can average out your gains and losses so that you don't have to cut people all the time. When it comes to places like Earl's and Cactus Club, and no offense to anyone who works for them or works with them, but in my opinion is I don't think that customers are really in their rank of number one things that they care about. Or sorry, not customers, employees.
I heard it. I heard what you're saying.
Yeah. But I doubt. I want to be proven wrong, but I doubt that employees are their number one thing. And having worked for Joey a long time ago, I never felt that I was anywhere in their top 10 list of who they care about. And so I for those restaurants, I don't know. Even someone like Taco Fino, you guys have big restaurants. I don't know how that would work. It's something that maybe I hope to experience one day and maybe figure out how to make it work. But I think you might have a better answer for if that's
no, possible. I mean, you can come and speak to any of the managers. Yeah, I'm sure they'd love for you to write the month schedule for 80 employees. No, yeah. I think you bring up a great point. It is difficult, not impossible. Just thought I would get your thoughts on it.
So, kind of going on that, like talking about, like that, working towards that fair workplace that's, more consistent, predictable, and where people treat each other, really with respect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess advice, so a leader that's in this Zoom call right now, like what do you think someone can do, as their role and to be able to kind of work towards that?
I mean, it's a simple step is just to gather your employees together and just have a chat. Just, even right before I did this, I pulled a few of my employees together. I'm like, I'm about to talk about workplace culture. Do you think I'm going to look like an idiot? Like, am I doing something terrible? Are you guys not happy? Like, just tell me what it is. Just have a frank conversation with the employees. And they talk to me about things that are working and things that we might need to work on. But I think that is the step that you have to take, and it doesn't have to be formal one-on-ones constantly, because even as anyone here who's been an employee, nobody likes formal one-on-ones. You feel nervous, you feel like you're going to say the wrong thing, you feel like you might be in trouble if you say something that isn't what the manager wants. So having sort of a group setting at least allows them to feel like they can say something with other people around them that can have context without later it being used against them, because everyone sort of heard what's going on. And it's not really an airing of grievances kind of talk. It's just, let's talk about what's working. Let's talk about what's not working. Maybe we can change it. And some things can't be changed because they have to do with the business model itself. But maybe there are some core things that can be talked about. And honestly, one of the few things that people can change is just the sort of attitude of communicating at work. It's a huge part of a lot of restaurants that I've worked at before and see among my staff, is that once you course correct people's communication and you do it in a non-confrontational and aggressive way, then they really have a chance to create a better relationship among themselves as a staff. And again, it's one step towards maybe a better workplace.
That's a great point too. So if someone were to come up and be like, well, like, what if, this conversation goes sideways, I think that as it relates to having a general apprehension to it, what would you tell someone that would be really nervous about, opening up that communication to a point where, feedback can be exchanged within the group?
If you have a restaurant where you can't have honest feedback, and if the honest feedback goes sideways, then your restaurant has a huge problem. You've just been hiding it this whole time. Right. Like if you have that kind of problem, it's better to just get it out than to sit on it until it explodes on its own. We've already seen what's happened to a few restaurants who, took something terrible that happened, whether it was with harassment or BLM or all those issues that came up. If you don't talk about them, eventually they're going to get talked about. So why not have a chance for you to participate in the conversation and see if there's anything you can do, rather than wait for it to fester and become out of your control, or you not even get a chance to redeem your staff or your management or whoever else who was participating in something. And some things are so terrible that unfortunately there are people that you have to get rid of because it doesn't make everyone else feel safe, but at least you're being responsible about those conversations.
No, I think that's great. And as it relates to, for people in this room, like, maybe that aren't holding leadership positions, say they're in a space where maybe that's not necessarily existing right now, like, and they maybe want to provide input or they want to start working towards this, what advice would you give that person?
You mean like in terms of how to get started?
Yeah, like say, like as it relates to someone that's not in a decision-making role, if they see opportunity for their respective spot, like what advice would you give them and be able to kind of, start working towards maybe championing some of that?
Yeah, sometimes it is difficult when, for example, like you're in a management role, but the person at the top just doesn't want to deal with it or doesn't want to do it. And so I feel like if you can take the smallest steps, like if you just slowly start to make that person lean towards what you think is better to do, that might be a way to get there. But if the person at the top is not convinced of these things, it's never going to change. And there are some places that unfortunately are not worth saving, and people will eventually figure it out, whether the business fails because they're not doing well, or because people stop going, or because people stop working there. But unfortunately, there are a lot of places that have very, very high turnover, but they just continue to exist and they continue to go along. But as we've seen now, I think that eventually, if it's not a great place to work, people will talk about it, and people will tell each other not to work there, and eventually you just won't have any staff. So I think it's difficult, again, for someone in a management position, that if you can't convince the person at the very top who is a decision maker to buy in to these things, there may not be a path, unless someone knows, and I don't have that answer.
That's fair. So, kind of before we move on to the next couple questions I have for you is, you have a lot of great perspective and a lot of good base information. Like, where would you tell people where they could go to start educating themselves if, say, they're a leader and they wanted to start working towards these things?
I mean, the first thing to do is go read the Employment Standards Act.
Right.
Like, if you need to know those things, and it's something that I spent a lot of time not looking into. I just counted on everyone around me to know the things, and luckily I did work with a couple of people who really did everything by the book. And there was Josh Carlson from Victoria. I'll always remember that he said, he's the one who manages Taco Fino and Superbaba with Mike, and he always told me the one thing you don't mess with is people's pay. He's like that, start there and then do everything else. Because basically, there were places still up until last year where sometimes they didn't get paid on payday, and the person doing the payroll was 3 or 4 days late. But it's like, your rent is not going to wait 3 or 4 days. So not paying somebody on the day they're supposed to get paid is a terrible practice, but still happens every day. So I think people need to get a grip of the Employment Standards Act before they open a restaurant, and realize that, like, when you open a restaurant, you're not cooking, you're managing people, and you're their boss, and you have to take care of all these people. And cooking is the second thing that you do, because I think a lot of people are passionate and they want to open restaurants because they think they're going to be in the kitchen serving all this food and it's so amazing. But really, you're a manager first and a cook second. I mean, maybe a cook third. You might be a plumber second, but it's you really, I think that's a great place to start. Is those resources are the best things to start from.
That's great. And, kind of building on that, I think you and I have talked about in the past, but, as it relates to places maybe promoting certain things, or, as it relates to like intention versus impact, you see a lot of, like, you've achieved quite a bit in your life, and most recently in the pandemic. So for example, like creating kind of initiative as it relates to Van FBC, and, working towards creating this really positive and fair workplace. You see other places too, where it's maybe, there's an intention there. We're like, oh, we're going to do this, but there's not really necessarily a follow through.
Yeah.
So what like, as it relates to that, like, you've probably seen it too, where there's intention versus impact, right?
Well, people just need to set small goals.
Right.
Don't just do small steps. I think the most important thing is to inch towards a better workplace, not to like renovate the whole thing overnight. You want to set the smallest goals you can, and do maybe one thing a week or one thing a month, honestly, is better than saying you're going to do something and then never doing it. So, I think people, this applies across the board to so many things. It's not just to workplaces or to restaurants, but people set audacious goals and then don't know how to get to them. And I think the best thing to do is just, it's one step every day, and hopefully eventually you'll get to a better place than where you are now.
That's awesome. Like, so I guess on that, how would you, you have those lofty goals, we all get excited. Intention is an easy way for our dopamine to just like start flowing. But yeah. What advice would you give someone in like planning that, like as it relates to breaking down maybe smaller tasks to a bigger, like to maybe a larger milestone? Like, is there a specific advice you would give to someone?
Well, I think the pandemic was a time for us to stop. I think the analogy that, I can't remember which cook or which chef said it, but like restaurants basically like a car on a highway that's constantly breaking down, but you don't have time to stop and fix it. And so I think the pandemic was a moment where everyone got to stop or was forced to stop, or for the most part, stop most of what they were doing. And I think the point was to, obviously, after figuring out how you're going to survive it, which again, a lot of restaurants did not survive it and are not surviving it moving forward, which is extremely unfortunate. But for the ones that do survive, maybe this is the time before we get right back into it, where everyone's coming in normally and there's no masks and we're back to regular revenue numbers. Maybe use this time as a reset to figure out what those goals are. And I mean, I don't have a plan for each restaurant. Every restaurant, again, is so different. It's hard to say every restaurant needs to do this. But I think the one thing that everyone needs to do is to have that talk with their staff and their management, and really just put aside their egos and say, what are we doing wrong? And everyone's doing something wrong, but at the same time, talk about what you're doing right. Obviously, you don't want to just be negative. So these are the things we're doing really well. Now, how do we make the things that we do wrong onto the same column as the things that we're doing well? And any restaurant that tells you that they don't have those things is not aware of what's going on in their own restaurant. And so it's my responsibility to constantly talk to my staff and my partners and figure out what's going on that's not good and tackle them day by day. But each restaurant's going to have their own goals and their own way to figure out what that plan is. For me to say this is how you do it would be extremely, I don't know what the word for it is, would have too much hubris in that, thinking that I know the answer to those. Because like I said, I talk from a point of view of a quick service style restaurant, and there's still a lot that I want to learn about the sit down, full service, full staff restaurants.
That's great. I really appreciate that. I think that, yeah, sometimes it can be like looking at Everest. You're right, with everything, communication, really understanding what needs to change so you can focus that too. I also really appreciate how you said, like, starting with that foundation of employment standards. That's like your decision-making foundation there. I recognize that we're running out of time here, and maybe we can open up the floor to some questions.
Yeah. So one of the questions here, I think, goes back to when you're talking about your drinking policies at Superbaba. Since a free drink or a cheap drink might be seen as an incentive for working in a restaurant, I guess we see that, right? You get a free beer. What made you decide no drinks versus something like a 2-drink limit? Why were you so hard on them?
Well, because I don't come from a culture of drinking. So for me, drinking does not vary. Like, it doesn't seem important to me. And I understand that here, like when the pandemic started, there was lineups down the block at every liquor store. It was a perspective to me that didn't make sense, in that, why do we depend so much on this thing? And why is it such a habit? And why, like, for example, in some places in Europe, it's so casual, but here we have a huge problem with it. Alcoholism is a very serious thing that people still treat like it's a normal everyday thing. And in my opinion, for example, like, smoking weed is way less dangerous than drinking alcohol, but for some reason we see it flipped. Yeah. So, I was at a restaurant in LA, which is it's a very well known in the industry. And we were there, and there was this server that was extremely nice to us. And he's like, "Hey, it's my birthday." And I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." When the other server came by, we said, "Hey, can we buy them a drink?" That server acted really weird, left, came back and said, "I'm sorry, but like, I talked to the manager. We do have a policy here where none of the cooks or staff is allowed to drink on the premises." Mm-hmm. They explained it to me, and it made a lot of sense. And I thought, okay, so this restaurant in California that is seen as one of the top ones in the area is doing it, then anyone else can do it. Sure. And I don't think alcohol should be an incentive for someone to work. And I think that touched on the point that I hate the most about it, is that alcohol is a substance that shouldn't be an incentive, because then it's an encouragement.
Sure, absolutely.
And so it's an incentive, but what about people who don't drink? So everyone else gets to drink. Why not offer someone a cigarette on their shift if we're going to be on that page? Like, it's a very odd thing. And again, I have a different perspective about it. And so I was like, we want to promote mental health and we want to promote better workplaces. Then why don't we just take something out of the equation that makes it worse? Because it definitely doesn't make it better. because it's one of those things that teeters on the fact that like, okay, 2 drinks is great, and then you get to the 3rd drink, and then who knows what's going to happen next.
2 drinks
So-
is great for some, not everyone.
What?
Sometimes 2 drinks is too much for some.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And you don't know everyone's limit. And so I think if you want to drink after work, drink at home, but don't make it a norm in the restaurant that encourages drinking. I mean, that's just, again, my perspective. People don't have to agree.
No, that's great. That's great. That's a great answer. Quickly to that point, do you think that this pandemic has negatively affected sort of addictions and people's addiction? We all noticed the long lineups around the blocks, going to the liquor store and that sort of thing. Do you think in the restaurant industry has been negatively impacted by what's going on?
I think we've yet to see the numbers of the real addiction from the pandemic, because things either increased or people started their addiction during the pandemic, because with nothing but time and uncertainty, people are going to, unfortunately, is it easier to have a drink or to do an exercise set at home?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very simple thing that you're gonna see. I think we're gonna see the worst of it maybe in a couple of years.
I think we have Kristen Bauer here. I can see your virtual thumbs up. Is saying there's a excellent point. The rates of addiction are skyrocketing right now during the pandemic. I'm gonna keep going through these questions. Is that okay?
Yeah.
We can get to them all. Do you think that customers would be willing to pay more if they knew that the restaurant was providing a safety net, i.e. health benefits, short-term disability to their staff? And then I'll ask the follow-up, depending on how you answer this.
So again, in the US, you see these things where you'll be at a restaurant and then there'll be an extra percentage tacked on your bill. And they say, we're charging this percentage to pay for. I hate that they do that. I would rather just see all the prices increase, and at the bottom of my receipt say, our prices might seem higher than normal, and this is why.
Yeah.
Because they make it look like it's your responsibility to pay for their staff's health benefits. Whereas I personally, if I went to a restaurant and everything was like a few dollars more, and they don't just say it on their menu, but it's a well-known thing in the community that they actually follow through with what they're talking about, I truly believe there will be customers who pay for it, because we go to some restaurants that make you pay crazy amounts of money for small plates, barely anything on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the norm before, but I think we can move towards a restaurant industry that still provides excellent food, but the more money you're paying is not just for the food, but it's for the restaurant to do well with them and their staff.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. Speaking from the restaurateur's perspective, I do think that people might go out less, but they might start picking their ponies on where they're going to spend their dollar, and they might have gone out 3 times, a month, a week, whatever it is you're going out, but now they might go twice or maybe once, and make that dollar go a little bit further. So
yeah.
Thanks for the question. I don't think I'm going to get to the follow-up, but thanks for asking. The next question is, owners tend to add food and drink discounts, not even a full comp, so just discounting some of the food as a benefit in lieu of actual health, dental, mental benefits. Where do you stand on giving staff full-time and part-time coverage? And should this be the standard practice, since hospitality staff don't tend to lead the healthiest lifestyles?
I mean, as it pertains to food, we always comp everyone's meal when they work. I don't believe in charging staff for one meal per shift. Like, it's such a penny pinching thing to do, to charge people money for something they're going to eat while they're at work. And I do see it as a benefit that you can always count on a healthy meal while you're at work. And then in terms of benefits in Victoria, we established a system where we give coverage. I think everything is covered like 80% in the plan, and it's a optional 50-50 buy-in. So we pay for half of it, they pay for the other half. And hopefully maybe one day, if we can get the margins working, we'll be able to pay for the full health benefits. But you still have to do things that will keep your business in business. So, you know, you could do as much as you can and aim to do those things. My perspective is know how much money is good for you. Like as an owner, know how much money you want to make and don't get greedy on top of it. So if you start making way more money than you ever thought that you would make, find a way to distribute that benefit among everyone you work with.
That's a great point. I don't know how many people are going to listen to you, but I think that is a great point. I'm going to try to wrap it up here. Taylor, what would you like to say? Any more questions, final questions?
Well,
I know it's 4:00, people.
yeah, and recognizing that, you know, it is for the one thing I do want to say is, Dallah, I really value and appreciate and very grateful for you being here today and sharing your experience with us and your journey and what you've learned along the way. Thank you. Like I've taken away quite a bit too. And to everyone in this room, this session's recorded. There's a lot of great stuff in there as it relates to beginning this journey, and even not saying the people in here are not, you know, leading great workplaces, but, you know, to even be better, because we can always grow and we can always do better. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thanks. And I guess the last thing I want to say is that if you, as an owner or as someone in management, even if bad things are not happening in your restaurant, but you hear them happening at other places, try and see if you can do your best not to encourage or support those places, and try to help them change, because, you know, I'm seeing it from people coming to work for us, and I'm trying to find a way to do it without it sounding like I want to call out the industry or specific individuals, because I do feel bad for a lot of employees that get taken advantage of.
That's a great point.
That's great. Great to finish on. Dallah, thank you again so much for your time. Thank you everybody for joining. It does mean a lot to us that you take the time out of your days to join us here. It's once a month, 1 hour, once a month. You can learn more about this speaker, this event at shiftchangenow.com. If you want to go and eat some tasty treats, Superbaba's on Main and 7th. Yeah, Main and 7th. Eat Superbaba.
Main and 8th.
Main and 8th. Yeah. That was close enough. Superbaba.ca. Today's donation again is going to the Downtown Eastside Women's Shelter. Thank you everybody so much for being here. Look out for our announcement for the next couple of sessions. We're really excited about them, and we'll see you all in a month. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.